This ship carried the atomic bomb, and it completed its mission. The weapon was delivered. The war was about to end, and the ship turned around and sailed home. But something went wrong. Something so simple, so unbelievably small, that it is almost impossible to believe. Nobody noticed it was missing. Not for one day, not for two, for 4 entire days, while nearly 900 men were floating in the Pacific Ocean, alone in the dark, with sharks circling beneath them, and the United States Navy did not even know they were there. This is not a ghost story. This is a business warning. Welcome to Deep Sea War Files, the channel where history's greatest naval disasters are studied, not for drama, but for the decisions, the failures, and the lessons that still apply today. Now, before we go any further, if this is the first time visiting this channel, think of it like finding a wise old friend who tells you things nobody else will say out loud. Subscribe. Hit that button like you're saving an important phone number, the kind you don't want to lose. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from today? Whether it is London, Lahore, Lagos, or Los Angeles, drop your city below. This community is global, and every name matters. In the summer of 1945, the United States was racing against time. The Second World War had dragged on for nearly 4 years. Millions had died. Entire cities had been reduced to ash. The American military command had made a decision. A decision so large, so final, that only a handful of people on Earth knew it was coming. They needed a ship. Not just any ship, they needed the fastest, most capable vessel available. A ship that could move quietly, move quickly, and ask no questions. They chose the USS Indianapolis. On July 16, 1945, the Indianapolis departed San Francisco on a classified mission. Its cargo was loaded in secret. The crew was told nothing specific. Even the ship's senior officers did not fully understand what they were carrying below deck. What they were carrying was the core of the atomic bomb. Little Boy, the weapon that would be dropped on Hiroshima just weeks later, its critical components were sealed in specially, constructed containers, and placed aboard the Indianapolis. The entire delivery had to happen before a specific window closed. The timeline was exact. The pressure was immense. And the ship performed perfectly. In just 10 days, the Indianapolis crossed the Pacific and delivered its cargo to Tinian Island. The mission was complete. The handoff was made. History had been quietly set in motion. And then, the Indianapolis turned around and headed for the Philippines. Here is where the story changes. Here is where a routine decision becomes one of the most catastrophic failures in military history. After completing a mission of historic importance, the Indianapolis was simply released. It was given its next set of sailing orders and sent on its way without any formal system in place to confirm its arrival, without any tracking protocol, without any checkpoint. In the language of modern business, the ship had been offboarded from the mission without a handover process. It was assumed that if anything went wrong, someone would report it. It was assumed that someone else was watching. And that assumption, that quiet, comfortable, entirely reasonable assumption, is exactly the kind of assumption that destroys organizations, collapses supply chains, and ends careers. Nobody questioned it, because nobody ever had to, until now. There is a specific kind of danger that does not announce itself. It does not come with alarms. It does not arrive with warning lights or urgent phone calls. It simply grows quietly. In the background, while everyone around it assumes that everything is fine. This is exactly what happened to the USS Indianapolis. On July 30, 1945, just days after its historic delivery, the Indianapolis was struck by 2 Japanese torpedoes fired from submarine I-58. The attack came in the middle of the night. The ocean was dark. The crew was asleep. The first torpedo tore through the bow. The second one found the fuel tanks. Within 12 minutes, the Indianapolis was gone. Nearly 300 men died in those first 12 minutes. trapped below deck, caught in explosions, pulled under with the ship as it disappeared into the black water of the Philippine Sea. But 890 men made it out. They surfaced into open ocean, some with life jackets, many without, some holding debris, some holding nothing at all. They looked around at each other in the darkness and understood in that moment one devastating truth. Nobody knew they were there. And here is where the story moves from tragedy into something that every serious business person must study carefully. The Indianapolis had not filed a distress signal that was properly received and acted upon. The ship's arrival at its next destination, Leyte Gulf in the Philippines, was never flagged as overdue. Multiple naval departments each believed that another department was responsible for monitoring the vessel. One office thought it was someone else's job. That office thought it belonged to another division. That division had simply never been assigned the task at all. In the corporate world, this is not unusual. It happens inside boardrooms, logistics networks, financial institutions, and supply chains every single day. A critical responsibility sits between two departments. Each assumes the other has ownership. And the gap, that invisible, undocumented gap, quietly becomes catastrophic. The military term for what happened is a breakdown in communication, but the business term is far more precise. It is called assumed accountability, and assumed accountability has one defining characteristic: it functions perfectly, right up until the moment it destroys everything. For 4 days, 890 men floated in shark-infested waters, and the system that sent them there did not even know to look. There is a moment in every crisis when the system that failed you becomes completely irrelevant, when waiting for rescue stops being a strategy, when the only thing that stands between survival and disappearance is the person floating next to you. The men of the USS Indianapolis reached that moment somewhere around the second day. The initial shock had worn off. The hope of immediate rescue had quietly dissolved into the horizon. The Pacific Ocean, vast, indifferent, and merciless, stretched endlessly in every direction. And the men who remained began to understand something that no military training had fully prepared them for. They were entirely on their own. The conditions were almost incomprehensible. Salt water burned their skin. The sun during the day was punishing. The nights were freezing. Fresh water did not exist. Some men, driven mad by thirst, drank from the ocean and deteriorated rapidly. Hallucinations began. Men started seeing things, arguing about things that were not there, swimming toward ships that did not exist. And beneath them, the sharks had found the group. Oceanic white-up sharks, among the most aggressive species in open water, had been drawn by the debris, the blood, and the movement. They circled, they tested, and then they attacked. Not once, but repeatedly, across all 4 days. The death toll from shark attacks during those 96 hours remains the largest in recorded maritime history. But here is what the history books often miss. Not everyone fell apart. Among the nearly 900 men scattered across that water, something remarkable and deeply instructive began to emerge. Small groups started to organize. Certain individuals, not always the highest-ranking officers, began to take quiet, deliberate control. They rationed energy. They kept weaker men afloat. They maintained rotation systems so no single person carried the full burden alone. They made decisions with incomplete information, under impossible pressure, and with zero institutional support. They created structure where the system had left none. And the data from the survivors tells a story that every entrepreneur and business leader must sit with seriously. The men who survived at the highest rates were not the strongest swimmers. They were not the most senior officers. They were the ones who found, or became, a center of calm leadership inside the chaos. When the external system collapses, when the supply chain breaks, the funding dries up, the market turns, the only infrastructure that remains is the one you've built inside your organization before the crisis arrived. The Indianapolis did not teach this lesson gently. It paid for it with 900 men in open water. There is something that powerful institutions do when they have failed completely. When the evidence is undeniable, when the public is watching, and someone must be held responsible. They find one person. They point, and they make sure the story ends there. On November 29, 1945, 4 months after 900 men had floated for 4 days in shark-infested waters while the United States Navy failed to notice, Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III was formally court-martialed. He was charged with hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag, a standard evasive maneuver used to confuse enemy submarines. The United States Navy placed the weight of the entire disaster on one man's shoulders, and the world accepted it. But here is what the record actually shows. The Naval Court of Inquiry had already identified multiple systemic failures. Officers who had received distress signals and ignored them. Departments that had failed to report the ship as overdue. An entire tracking system so poorly designed that a vessel carrying the atomic bomb could disappear from the Pacific Ocean for 4 days without a single alarm being raised. The system had failed at every level. And yet, it was McVeigh who stood trial. Even more extraordinary, the Navy brought in the Japanese submarine commander who had fired the torpedoes, Makasora Hashimoto, to testify against the American captain, an enemy commander flown to Washington, to help convict the man whose ship he had sunk. The message being sent was unmistakable. This was not our failure. This was his. McVeigh was convicted. His naval career was destroyed. For the rest of his life, he received hate mail from families of the dead, people who had been told and believed that one man's decision had killed their sons and brothers. On November 6, 1968, Charles McVeigh took his own life. He was found holding a toy sailor in his hand. The institution that failed him outlived him by decades. And then, 55 years after the court-martial, the United States Congress officially exonerated Captain McVeigh. The conviction was cleared. The record was corrected, but the man was gone. The families had grieved for a lie, and the systemic failures that actually caused the disaster had never once been put on trial. Here is the lesson that every entrepreneur, every executive, and every serious operator must carry forward from this story. Institutions do not protect people. They protect themselves. When a supply chain collapses, when a financial system fractures, when a business model fails at the structural level, the machinery of power will search quickly and efficiently for the most available individual to absorb the blame. It will construct a narrative. It will present that narrative with authority and documentation, and most people will believe it. The business person who understands this does not become cynical. They become precise. They document everything. They build systems with clear written accountability. They never allow critical responsibilities to exist inside informal agreements or assumed arrangements. Because when the torpedoes hit, and they always eventually hit, the institution will not go down with the ship. It will make sure that you do. This has been Deep Sea War Files. The USS Indianapolis delivered the weapon that ended a war. Then it was forgotten. Then it was sunk. Then its captain was convicted for the system's failure. And then, 55 years too late, the truth finally surfaced. History does not always move at the speed of justice. But it moves. Study it carefully. It is trying to tell you something.